Hello and welcome to another Jabava London game featuring Fabiano Caruana with white, and he's playing against Maxime Lagarde. And in this game, let's see, first I'll do the analysis. Excuse me. I'll take a look at this game review and just see what was happening. So Caruana played with white. So remember, I don't know why it keeps erasing the names here, but he had the white pieces. He played at 94.4 accuracy rating versus 81.3% by his opponent. And a 3150 rating level versus 2850. So of course Caruana won. So let's take a look and see how he won this game. All right, so he used the Jabava London, but it started out a little bit differently here with knight to c3 first. Usually they'll play, if you're doing the Jabava London, you'll play d4 first most of the time. But it transposes back into the Jabava London. What did it even call it here? Starting out, apparently it's the Van Geet opening. And then they call this the Queen's Pawn opening, Shigorin variation. But once it gets to this is the Jabava London setup. So usually with the London system, you put your pawn on d4, bishop to f4, and then you might have the knight up to f3, but the Jabava is a little bit different because you'll bring your knight to c3 early. So the game continues with e6 by Caruana's opponent. So he immediately plays knight to b5, piling up with the bishop on this c7, this pawn on c7, threatening a fork here. So this is a common theme in the Jabava London, and the computer recommends knight to a6 here, but then that knight is kind of tied down to guarding this pawn, and it's stuck on the edge of the board. Although, after knight to a6 in the future, the pawn can push forward and drive this knight away. But instead, Caruana's opponent plays an interesting maneuver with his bishop, checking here. So we have a block. The bishop is driven back, but now the bishop is helping guard this here. So the computer actually likes a4 immediately, and then you may threaten this b4 move and try to trap the bishop. But in the game, we have e3, another common move in the Jabava London. That way, if this bishop is attacked by the knight, you can give up that bishop and recapture with this e-pawn on f4. And then the pawn on f4 and the pawn on d4 kind of lock down this e5 square. So the game continues with castling and now development by both sides. But first, this knight is kicked away, retreats to the edge of the board. And it looks like the computer actually preferred this knight to d6 move, maybe going after this bishop, but then you'd be giving up a knight for this bad bishop that's locked in behind its own pawns. Or you could maybe try and leave that knight there, but I don't know, the bishop might come under attack at some point. All right, so knight develops. Bishop develops, aiming at the king side here, and Lagarde jumps his knight forward, blocking the path of the bishop, and the game continues with castling by Caruana and pawn to f5. So now, if this knight is captured, one of these pawns could recapture and kind of have a clamping effect on the center of the board here and chase this knight. So we have c4 being played, and the computer says that is a mistake. That knight to c2 would have been better. But, even though it was a mistake, it looks like it didn't change the evaluation too much. It's about a half a pawn's worth of material, the equivalent of that. And at this level, that could be a big deal with these high level players exploiting every little mistake. But what does the computer say would have been better? Apparently, knight to c2 is what the computer prefers. And then after that, maybe a6 here, and then h4. But in the game, we had c4, trying to attack here in the center, break up this pawn structure. And here, the best move would have been g5, apparently. Immediately attacking this bishop. And then bishop takes e4 is recommended. So, in the game, there was a missed opportunity. The bishop retreats back, attacking this bishop of white's on f4. But computer prefers this g5 move. And then after that, we would have what? Bishop to g5, or excuse me, g3 retreating. Knight captures. Pawn captures towards the center. And then rook to f7. So, maybe queen and rook would double up here, start pushing pawns forward. But you get the idea. The game could have continued in this manner. But instead, after c4, bishop retreats back, attacking here. And then in the game, we have an exchange of the bishops. So recapture. And now this knight jumps back to reposition, maybe to target this knight. So pawn moves forward, maybe giving the light squared bishop some place to develop. And now knight jumps forward. So computer prefers a capture here, doubling up the pawns. But instead we have, let's see, let me go back a little bit. So the bishop develops kind of lining up on the king side. There's a lot of material in between. But if the center opened up, the bishop could maybe be firing down towards white's king. So rook to c1. Queen slowly moves forward. And now the knight repositions. Rook to the center. And a3 here. So continuing on, we have king to h8. And this is a mistake, sending the game to a little over +1 in white's favor. The computer prefers c5. So if we take a look at c5, well, here computer recommends an exchange with capture, or even b4, not relieving the tension, but c captures, pawn recaptures, and now maybe b3, or we could just exchange here. See, pawn captures, and now computer really recommends this b4 move here. All right, in the game though, we had king to h8. So why is this a mistake? It looks like b4 is the best move to play to try and keep an advantage, and that's what Caruana plays. So he finds the best move, gaining space on the queen side, maybe threatening to push forward here and attack the queen. But we have a capture, recapture, and the queen retreats back. It was unprotected here. Actually, the knight is protecting it. So maybe by dropping back, the queen may cover these squares, perhaps try and go after the king side or move to the king side in the future. So the game continues with knight to f4. Rook moves up. Queen repositions here to protect create a battery with the bishop. Perhaps intending to attack, trade off the bishops. But let's see what happens. The computer actually says queen to b3. Creating a battery in this direction would have been better. So let's take a look at that. That would leave, oh man, here we would have queen, bishop, knight all piling up. Now this knight could drop back and help defend here. So now what's the recommendation? Attacking. Then knight should capture. b5, attacking, and knight takes d8. Capture, rook captures, and queen captures. So, the game could have headed in that direction, leaving white still with an advantage. But in the game, we had queen to e2. Pawn moves forward, attacking the knight. So capture, knight captures. So exchanges in the center of the board. Now white centralizes his rook, trying to fight for control of this open d file. And black strikes back, doubling his rooks. So, of course, Caruana does not want to leave a pair of rooks controlling this open file. So he trades off, a pair of the rooks. And now, let's see. Here the computer recommends bishop to a6, targeting this bishop. But in the game, we have h3. Perhaps waiting to see what black will do, giving a little escape hatch for the king in the future. And so the game continues with g6 here. Maybe preparing to move the king up towards the center of the board, as that's important to do in the end of the game. As long as your king is safe, towards the end of the game, you want to move the king up to help fight and defend. Instead of letting it sit idly by in the corner. All right, so bishop retreats back, attacking the knight. And now we have a pawn push, a mistake. Knight retreat to f6 would have been better. So computer recommends retreating back, and then bishop to c4. So if white plays bishop to c4, grabbing this diagonal, the king starts moving towards the center. And then what is recommended here? It looks like queen to c2. And then now they want king up to h6. All right, well, in the game, we had this position, c5. So the pawn majority, whenever you have a pawn majority like this of 3 pawns versus 2, it's usually a good idea to push the unopposed pawn first. And then if these trade off, then you have this pawn majority. But here, it wasn't such a good idea because the queen cannot capture, and it breaks black's pawns apart. So after capture, we have an exchange. And, of course, the queen couldn't recapture because the rook would take the queen. So now Caruana has succeeded in breaking apart these pawns, leaving this weaker isolated pawn here on c5. So the game continues with the queen moving up the board. Possible checking threats here. Then if the king moves down, maybe this pawn could be picked off, and white's a pawn could start trying to move. But the game continues with the rook backing up, getting behind the passed pawn, preparing to start pushing that pawn forward. And now the queen blockading. But a mistake here. White is still in the lead, but it looks like rook to d1 immediately would have been better. So if we take a look at that, rook to d1. Then you have a check threat possible with the rook up here. Computer recommends rook to f6 here. which would allow, if the king is checked and the king moves up, then from f6 the rook could block other checks here on b7 or c7. Or excuse me, b7 by the queen or d7 by the white rook. All right, so in the game, let's see here. We had queen to c4, an attack on the knight. And so this knight moves to h5 here. Now, normally you wouldn't want to move your knight to the edge of the board. But here, this is an exception as it kind of blocks the g7 escape square from the king. So then there could be possible threats up here on the back rank. So the game continues with an attack on the queen. Computer says that's the best move. And now queen to b5. So threatening, a possible check up here. The game continues with a pawn push. So this is a mistake. And it turns out this is a game losing mistake. And before we go into why, let's see what the computer did recommend. Apparently it would have been better to just push forward with this pawn, attacking the queen. And now queen to b7 or... they even recommend queen to b... retreating back to b1 here. But, if we have something like that, let's see if the computer says that's best. No, now it's saying queen to b1. Retreating the queen would have been better. But, anyway, the game would have been a lot closer. But after this c4 pawn push, the game-losing mistake here, now we have the rook attacking here, and this bishop is pinned to the queen. So what does black do? Black ignores that, just starts pushing the pawn, but now there's a mate in 6. Better would have been to just defend, but even with that, there's a mate in 13, and it's just not looking too good here. So, what do you do here? Queen to b8, check, bishop blocks. Now you can trade off rooks, and let's see. Looks like the best move is c3 to just keep pushing this passed pawn. You can't even capture here because this rook is protected. So it's pretty much losing for black. Anyway, back to the game. We had a pawn push and now capture, attacking the queen. And, the battery is created, getting ready to push this pawn forward. But it's too late at this point because now the queen is captured. And this is where the game ended. Because, what could happen? What is the most resistance that black could put up? It looks like queen to h2, just giving the queen up. But, if you capture here, well, then you just have rook to d8. And because that knight is preventing the king from moving off the back rank, the only possible move would be to block, and then you have a checkmate. So, nice game by Caruana. If we go back and look at what level he played at, 94.4% accuracy versus 81.3 by his opponent, 3150 rating in this game versus 2850 by his opponent. And the opening, 96.9 versus 93.7. So maybe his opponent was a little confused in the opening. And then 91.7 middle game versus 88, and 100% end game versus 12.6 by his opponent. All right, well, interesting game there, another Jabava London game. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments with whatever you'd like to say. And thank you for watching. Have a super chess day.